Hello everyone. This screencast is meant to help you to start thinking about transitions and introductions, not just how we do them, but a little bit more into why we do them, because they are very functional parts of English writing. So, why do we need them? English is what we call a writer-responsible language. What that means is that if a reader of English reads something and they don't understand it, they're very likely to say it's the writer's fault. The writer was boring. The writer was unclear. The writer didn't explain things in an interesting way. These kinds of things. So, as English readers, we put a lot of responsibility on our writers to make things easy for us, to make them as clear as possible. Now, I keep saying English because many other languages are reader responsible. I do a lot of work with students from China, Korea, these areas, and if those students don't understand something they're meant to read, particularly for class, they'll usually tell me it's their fault, that they didn't have enough background knowledge, that they were not paying close enough attention. So, this isn't to say that one way is better than another, but it's meant to give you some context about why in English we place so much emphasis on strong structure and support, because our readers aren't connecting the dots for us. They're looking at our reading and they kind of expect it to be in a finished package, which is great for us as readers, but it means we have a little bit more work to do as writers. So, when we think about things like logical organization and how we help the readers get from one place to another, it's important to realize that what we think of as logical organization in English isn't the way that everybody else organizes. So if we look at this picture from Robert Kaplan, who was a linguist in 1966, you get a visual representation of how other languages tend to organize. English is fairly A leads to B leads to C. We're fairly direct in English. What Kaplan called Semitic languages, which are also going to include not just Hebrew, but Arabic and a lot of Middle Eastern languages like Kurdish and Turkish, these kinds of things, they tend to rely heavily on coordinating conjunctions. So if you read something by somebody whose first language is Arabic, for instance, you're going to see a lot of ands or buts or ors that are connecting sentences in a very lengthy way. So everything is connected, and sometimes they will go off on what might seem like a tangent to an English reader. So what Kaplan calls Oriental languages, we now, of course, say Asian, but this is going to include Chinese, Japanese, Korean, these kinds of languages. You'll notice that it's very strongly connected, like English, but they don't start out by telling you what the main idea is. They're going to circle around to it gradually and take the reader on this sort of a journey from the beginning to the end. Romance languages, so here we're talking about French and Spanish and Italian, are going to also have what appear to English speakers to be tangents. So they're going to eventually connect them, but they're going to seem a little bit out of place to English speakers. Russian is, you can kind of think of it as if you ran a Romance language and the Arabic language were very hard at each other in terms of introduction or organizational patterns. But again, this isn't to say that one is better than the other, but that we have certain expectations based on our cultural background, our language background, and what we think is good organization. So, introductions are kind of our first introduction to the reader. This is our chance to catch them, to get their attention. And introductions have 3 jobs. They get the reader's attention, they give any necessary background information, and they preview the paper. So, getting the reader's attention we can do in a number of different ways. You can talk about what you have in common with the reader. For instance, something like, we've all been asked what we want to be when we grow up. So something that makes a connection with the reader that says, hey, I come from a similar background, I understand your concerns and questions. We can ask a question. I know some of you were told by well-meaning 5th grade teachers that you never have questions in writing. However, if a question is done for a good purpose and you don't overdo it, like the Pete Wells Guy Fieri restaurant review, it can be a very effective way of getting somebody's attention. Similarly, you can share surprising or shocking information. So this is a great use for statistics, data, this kind of thing. You can start with an anecdote. People are very conditioned to like stories. We share stories as a means of communicating basically from the time we are born. So this could be a personal anecdote. I remember in 1st grade when my teacher asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I told her I wanted to be an astronaut. Or secondhand. So this is particularly common, say for instance, if you were writing a paper on climate change and you are telling the story of someone who has lost their family farm in Haiti because of increasing water levels due to global warming. You can also use a quote, and there are a lot of other ways of doing it, but these are just some very common ways of getting readers' attention. Background information is often used in terms of defining or limiting the topic, but this really needs to be the bare minimum. You don't want to overload this introduction. This is what the reader needs to understand to get the first few paragraphs. So don't worry about putting all your technical information in here, but if you are, say, writing a paper on violence, you might limit the topic in the introduction to violence in major cities in America from 2000 to 2010. That gives them some more information to help them decide if this paper is going to be relevant to them. Finally, you're going to preview the topic. So, this is kind of like the preview to a movie. You want to get an idea of what the paper is and the general direction, but you don't want to give it all away. So, think about, for instance, you want to go see a new horror movie, there are previews for it, it looks really great, and then suddenly they tell you who did it. Probably not the best way of having a preview, because now I don't feel like I need to go see that film, because I already know what happens. So think about this as giving the shape of the paper to your reader, but not necessarily all the details that might accompany it. So, the last thing I want to talk about in this presentation are transitions. Transitions are bridges between ideas. The more closely connected the ideas are, the less of a bridge you need. So you can imagine you're out hiking in the mountains and you see a small creek, a foot or so across. You're not going to walk 5 miles out of your way to go find a bridge over that. You're just going to carefully cross it, maybe step on a rock or two, and you'll be fine. Now, if you were hiking and you come across the Colorado River, where the banks are much farther apart, you're probably going to need a fairly good bridge to get across that safely. This is the same way in writing. When the ideas are closely connected, then you don't need much of a bridge. But the farther apart they are, the more you need a bridge. So, simple transitions for closely connected ideas might be things like next, then, later, and also. For more complex transitions, you want to show where you were and where you're going. So again, if you think of the bridge, you want it to be secure on both sides of the river. You don't want a bridge that has really good mooring on one side and then it's just kind of hanging out in the open air on the other side of the river. So, for example, you have a paper where paragraph A is talking about dogs and paragraph B is talking about snakes. So you might have a transition that shows where you were and where you're going that looks like this. While dogs continue to be the most popular pet in America, snakes are increasingly common as companions for people with allergies. So, we see where we were talking about dogs, and it gives us a very brief preview as to where we're going talking about snakes. In terms of positioning, some people will put transitions at the end of, in this case, paragraph A, or some people will put it at the beginning of paragraph B. Either one is fine. So it's just a stylistic preference at that point. The important thing is that you are guiding this reader who is depending on you because they're not doing a lot of the work on their own. So they are trusting you and your transitions to help them move between ideas in the way that you're expecting them to as the author. So, now that you have listened to this webcast, I'd like you to take a look at your introduction for this project and your preconceptions and post those for the peer review on that topic. Thank you.